The Metropolitan Tower's grand ballroom sparkled under the glow of its towering chandeliers, each crystal prism scattering light like a constellation brought indoors. The polished marble floors reflected the brilliance above, giving the impression that the city skyline outside had somehow spilled into the room. Dad had gone all out for his 60th birthday. This wasn't just a party, it was a statement, a testament to a lifetime of achievement. Every detail, from the cascading light roses in massive centerpieces to the subtle notes of the live jazz quartet, radiated elegance, power, and money. I lingered near the floor-to-ceiling windows, letting the cool night air from the open terrace drift over me as I observed the crowd. The city's most influential movers and shakers were gathered here. Prominent lawyers, powerful politicians, renowned developers, and families whose wealth had defined entire neighborhoods. They laughed, clinked champagne glasses, and complimented one another as though the world outside the ballroom simply didn't exist. Dad, Vincent Castellano, was the undeniable center of attention. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier lights, and his tailored midnight blue tuxedo emphasized the presence that had made him legendary in real estate circles. At 60, he still carried the magnetic charm that had made younger businessmen seek his advice. And tonight, he wore the satisfaction of a man who had built an empire from scratch. His voice, confident and commanding, floated over the heads of guests as he spoke about deals, vision, and legacy, the kind of conversation that left even seasoned professionals nodding in admiration. Beside him, stepmother Patricia shone like a jewel in her champagne silk gown. Every strand of hair, every glimmering accessory announced the careful, polished perfection she carried as the wife of one of the city's wealthiest men. I noticed the small details, the diamond earrings that caught the chandelier light, the subtle but unmistakable air of self-assurance she exuded, details that suggested she was used to the spotlight and knew exactly how to hold it. Marcus, my older half-brother, was in his element. At 28, he already had multiple successful deals under his belt and carried himself like someone born to inherit the Castellano legacy. His wife Sophia mirrored his pride with flawless elegance. As Marcus discussed the latest multi-million-dollar development, adjusting his watch with an almost theatrical casualness, it was clear that the ballroom buzzed with admiration. For him, not me. I sipped my champagne, Dom Perignon naturally, letting their boasts wash over me. They had no idea that the black cocktail dress I wore had been tailored by the same house that dressed tech moguls, or that the pearl earrings at my ears were worth more than Marcus's monthly salary. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting. This was their world, their show, their carefully curated celebration, and I, for all intents and purposes, were merely a spectator. Dad raised his glass and addressed the room, his voice rich and commanding, speaking of legacy and family. Everyone turned to listen. The chatter dimmed as he painted a picture of the dynasty built with sweat, intelligence, and vision. He spoke proudly of Marcus, his achievements, and the future of Castellano properties, nodding knowingly as his son absorbed the recognition. Patricia smiled as expected, every inch the devoted, adoring stepmother, but her eyes betrayed the satisfaction she always seemed to feel when my father's praise, unearned in my eyes, was directed elsewhere. And then his gaze found me. The warm attention drained from his voice as he spoke my name, each syllable cutting through the elegant atmosphere like glass. Natalie, my biological daughter, he said, continued to disappoint me. His words, meant to shame, turned every head in the ballroom towards me. 200 people, some sympathetic, some curious, watched the unfolding scene. My cheeks flushed slightly, not from embarrassment, but from the familiar sting of a lifetime of underestimated potential. He outlined my failures, living in a small apartment, driving a modest car, pursuing investments he claimed were trivial. Every word emphasized the gap between his expectations and my reality. Patricia's faint, smug smile was evident, and Marcus nodded, the pride in his father's approval of his own success implicitly contrasted with my supposed inadequacies. The room fell into a tense hush, as the edge of humiliation sharpened. I could feel the collective gaze on me, but I refused to react impulsively. This was the moment I had anticipated, the moment the stage was perfectly set. Not for my embarrassment, but for my revelation. I placed my champagne glass on the marble table, heels clicking softly as I moved towards them. Calm, composed, and deliberate. The air around us seemed to hold its breath, and in that suspended moment, I knew that everything was about to change. The eyes of the room followed me as I approached the family table, the soft hum of the jazz quartet now a subtle backdrop to the unspoken tension that had settled over the Metropolitan Tower ballroom. Conversations, once lively and carefree, had dwindled into murmurs as guests sensed something significant was unfolding. For a moment, the sparkle of the chandeliers above seemed harsher, sharper, reflecting the sudden scrutiny I had drawn upon myself. Dad leaned back slightly in his chair, his usual commanding presence faltering just enough to betray his surprise. Vincent Castellano, the man whose confidence had filled countless boardrooms, who had brokered billion-dollar deals with a firm handshake and an unyielding gaze, now looked uncertain. Patricia, ever the poised stepmother, maintained her calm facade, but the subtle tightness around her eyes and the slight blanching of her cheeks revealed the tension she was carefully masking. Marcus, my half-brother, shifted in his seat, his polished leather shoes squeaking softly against the marble. He straightened his back as though the attention were a spotlight threatening to reveal cracks in his carefully constructed world. Sophia, ever attentive, held his hand, her perfectly manicured nails gripping his fingers as though to anchor him in the comfort of their shared status. They were the family picture of success and approval, the epitome of the Castellano legacy. But the facade was about to be challenged. Dad's voice, once commanding the room, now carried the crisp edge of frustration. "Natalie, this isn't the time or the place to parade around your so-called accomplishments. You've refused every opportunity we've offered you, every mentorship, every position, every chance to be part of the family business." His silver hair glinted under the light, but his eyes, the same eyes that had once seemed impenetrable, flickered with disbelief. I paused for a moment, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. Every guest could sense the tension. The elegance of the ballroom contrasted sharply with the raw edge of the confrontation unfolding at its center. I spoke calmly, deliberately, my voice carrying enough to reach the attentive crowd without raising it unnecessarily. "Father, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not here to embarrass anyone or disrupt a celebration. I simply thought it might be worth clarifying what my work has truly accomplished." The room seemed to lean in collectively. The murmurs faded into a charged silence. Patricia's smile remained poised, yet her eyes betrayed an almost imperceptible impatience. Marcus's jaw tightened. His confident posture was now edged with uncertainty. The powerful men and women of the city, previously absorbed in their cocktails and polite chatter, now turned their attention fully to the unfolding scene, curiosity and disbelief painting their expressions. Dad's laugh, sharp and dismissive, tried to cut through the tension, but it lacked its usual authority. "Accomplished? Natalie, you live in a small apartment, drive a car most would consider outdated, and pursue ventures that nobody here takes seriously. That is not accomplishment. That's survival." His voice echoed across the marble floors, each word punctuating the gulf between perception and reality. I held my composure, stepping closer, letting the confidence in my posture speak as loudly as my words would soon. "Survival," I said softly, yet deliberately enough for those nearby to hear. "Father, it seems there may be some misunderstanding about my investments and the scope of my work." I reached into my purse and slowly retrieved my phone, the small, sleek device a symbol of quiet power and control in a room full of inherited wealth and performative success. The gasp that followed, though subtle, rippled through the guests. The elegant chatter had ceased entirely. Even the jazz quartet had dipped into a quieter refrain, sensing the change in atmosphere. Patrons, old friends, and city magnates alike turned toward the unfolding drama, their eyes wide with anticipation. For the first time that evening, I felt a shift, not just in the room, but in the balance of power that had long seemed so firmly entrenched. Dad's expression hardened, but uncertainty crept in, betraying the cracks in his otherwise impenetrable facade. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Natalie, what are you implying?" His voice, previously a blunt instrument of authority, now wavered, betraying curiosity and a hint of unease. I smiled faintly, calmly unlocking my phone. Just that perhaps my version of success might differ from yours, but it is very real, and it might be closer to home than you think. The ballroom, once a glittering haven of celebrations and polite acclaim, now held its collective breath, ready for a revelation that would soon redefine everything. The Metropolitan Tower ballroom felt impossibly still. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their light a little longer, as if the room itself sensed the tension ending in the air. Every guest's attention had shifted, a silent consensus that something extraordinary was unfolding. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence, glasses paused halfway to lips, and even the soft cadence of the jazz quartet had dropped to near silence, playing as if on cue for a moment of cinematic drama. Dad leaned back in his chair, the familiar authority in his posture flickering into something less certain. Vincent Castellano, the man whose opinion had once been law for anyone in this room, now had a trace of disbelief etched across his features. Patricia's calm composure, the mask she wore so consistently, began to falter in small but unmistakable ways. The subtle tightening around her lips, the brief twitch in her diamond-studded wrist. Marcus, ever the confident heir apparent, straightened too quickly in his chair, clearly aware that this was no ordinary confrontation. Sophia's hand gripped his arm like a lifeline, her perfect composure struggling to mask the tension she felt radiating from her husband. I remained poised, letting the room absorb my presence. My heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor as I stepped closer to the table. Each measured movement was deliberate, signaling control without aggression. Dad's words from moments ago still lingered in the air. My failures, my lack of direction, the supposed triviality of my investments. But in this silence, those words had begun to lose their weight. "I understand this may come as a surprise," I began, my voice steady, carrying through the room without rising into confrontation. "But there's a chance that your understanding of my work and my success is incomplete." A subtle murmur ran through the crowd, curiosity rippling like a wave over the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. Everyone wanted to see where this was going, and even those who had never met me before leaned forward slightly, sensing the importance of what was about to unfold. Dad leaned back in his chair, the familiar authority in his posture flickering into something less certain. "Natalie," he said, "I've already made it clear. This is my birthday. I will not tolerate delusions or fabrications." His voice, once sharp and commanding, wavered just enough to hint at a crack in his armor. Patricia's faint smile remained, but the satisfaction that had once colored her expression was now tinged with doubt. Marcus, ever the confident heir apparent, straightened too quickly in his chair, clearly aware that this was no ordinary confrontation. Sophia's hand gripped his arm like a lifeline, her perfect composure struggling to mask the tension she felt radiating from her husband. I reached into my purse slowly, deliberately, allowing the small, sleek device to draw attention. Its presence was understated, but powerful, a symbol of control, of investments, of knowledge, quietly accumulated over years. "There's no need for alarm," I said, lifting the phone for anyone nearby to see. "I simply wanted to clarify the facts regarding my investments and living situation." A faint ripple of intrigue swept through the guests. Old money, new money, city developers, legal experts, none of them had anticipated this moment. They had come expecting another lavish birthday celebration, complete with speeches, polite applause, and predictable family hierarchy. Instead, they were now witnesses to a quiet but potent challenge to that hierarchy, and the room felt electric with anticipation. Dad leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce through the calm exterior I presented. "Natalie," he asked. The words carried authority but also an edge of incredulity, betraying the hint of doubt he could not completely mask. Every guest could sense it. The very foundation of the Castellano legacy, at least as it had been understood, was about to be questioned. I allowed a small, controlled smile to touch my lips, simply that my version of success may not fit the picture you've painted, and it might be more substantial than anyone here realizes. The room seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Patrons glanced at one another, some with raised eyebrows, some with barely contained curiosity, while the subtle strains of the jazz ensemble underscored the tension like a cinematic score. This was the calm before the storm, the moment right before everything would shift. The stage was set, the audience ready, and every pair of eyes in the ballroom now focused entirely on me. In this room of power, wealth, and expectation, the balance of authority was about to change, and no one, not even Dad, would see it coming. The Metropolitan Tower ballroom, once a scene of celebration and polite applause, had transformed into an arena of silent anticipation. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. The murmurs of curiosity now hushed into an expectant hush. Dad leaned forward slightly, his posture rigid, the confidence he had carried all evening now replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Patricia's carefully maintained composure showed subtle cracks, a twitch of her wrist, a slight narrowing of her eyes, betraying the worry she was trying to hide. Marcus, the heir apparent, sat straighter, his jaw tight, his confidence flickering like a candle in a sudden draft. I took a slow, deliberate breath and held the room with my gaze. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding," I said softly, the words calm but commanding. "You all assume that because I live modestly and do not flaunt my achievements, that I have not been building something substantial. The truth is, I have." Dad's face tightened, his eyes narrowing as he tried to gauge my meaning. "Natalie, I don't understand. What exactly are you implying?" His tone carried authority, but the undercurrent of disbelief was unmistakable. The 200 or so guests, influential business figures, city elites, and family acquaintances, leaned in slightly, the tension in the room almost tactile. I took a slow, deliberate breath and held the room with my gaze. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding," I said softly, the words calm but commanding. "You all assume that because I live modestly and do not flaunt my achievements, that I have not been building something substantial. The truth is, I have." Dad's face tightened, his eyes narrowing as he tried to gauge my meaning. "Natalie, I don't understand. What exactly are you implying?" The 200 or so guests, influential business figures, city elites, and family acquaintances leaned in slightly, the tension in the room almost tactile. I held up my phone, a simple gesture that somehow felt like drawing a sword in this silent battlefield. "This," I said, opening my property management app, "shows exactly what I've been managing." The screen glowed faintly under the chandelier light, reflecting off the marble floors and crystal glassware, highlighting the contrast between perception and reality. The guests shifted in their seats, murmurs rippling quietly through the crowd. Dad's initial frown deepened, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Natalie, what is this?" he whispered, though the words carried across the table. "I own the Metropolitan Tower," I said calmly, letting the words hang in the air like a weight that demanded attention. "This building, where we stand tonight, belongs to me." For a heartbeat, the room froze. The soft strains of the jazz quartet seemed distant, like a forgotten echo. Patrons' glasses clinked quietly against each other as disbelief rippled silently through the room. Patricia's perfectly composed expression faltered completely, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Marcus's eyes widened, and even Sophia's hand slipped slightly from his arm as shock took hold. I also own 12 other commercial buildings across the city. 3 of them happen to be properties that Castellano Properties manages for other investors. The total value of my portfolio exceeds $400 million, and that's just the real estate holdings. Dad's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass, his confident demeanor crumbling in real time. That, that's impossible. You're 26. How? His voice cracked, disbelief hanging like smoke in the air. I smiled faintly, calmly showing him the screen on my phone. I began investing at 18 with the trust fund left to me by Grandma Castellano. I reinvested profits, leveraged my holdings, and expanded steadily. The Metropolitan Tower is just one part of a larger portfolio I've been quietly building for years. The reactions around the room were instantaneous. Prominent business figures who had been quietly observing now leaned closer, whispers of astonishment spreading through the crowd. Dad, once the master of the room, now looked almost small in his chair, his earlier dominance replaced by stunned silence. Patricia's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Marcus's earlier confidence evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that everything he had assumed about the family hierarchy was wrong. I held the moment, letting the silence and shock settle fully. Father, if anyone here has been wondering who truly controls this building and these properties, it's me. Not you, not Marcus. Me. The room exhaled collectively, an invisible tide of tension slowly dissipating into murmurs, incredulous whispers, and astonished glances. In that moment, the balance of power had shifted, and the Metropolitan Tower, the very stage of Dad's empire, now stood as a symbol of the truth I had quietly cultivated. The room was silent, the kind of silence that only comes when hundreds of people realize that the world they've been observing is about to be upended. Dad sat frozen, his hand still resting on the table, eyes wide as though he were seeing the truth for the first time. Marcus leaned forward, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Patricia's lips were parted slightly, her perfectly polished composure shattered in a way I had never witnessed. The guests, once focused on polite conversation and cocktail glasses, now watched with rapt attention. Dad's voice broke the silence, low and incredulous. Natalie, if what you're saying is true, then you own this building? All of it? I nodded calmly. Yes, Father. I own it outright. I bought the Metropolitan Tower through my investment company, Meridian Holdings, 18 months ago. The purchase was $247 million in cash at a time when the previous owners were facing bankruptcy. It's all fully documented and managed through my property app. He exhaled sharply, the first visible sign of panic crossing his face. But security? His voice faltered as realization set in. He had called for my removal earlier, unaware that he had no authority over the very people he was trying to command. That's when the security guard, tall and professional, stepped forward. His steps were deliberate, but as he reached the table, his expression shifted from courtesy to a mix of deference and awe. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but respectful. "Are you Miss Natalie Castellano?" "Yes," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze directly. The guard's posture straightened further. "Ma'am, I apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. You are the primary contact for all security matters in the Metropolitan Tower. I cannot and will not remove you from this building. That includes tonight's event." A hush fell over the room, the kind that only comes when authority is flipped on its head in a single moment. Dad's face shifted from confusion to horror in seconds. The confidence he had exuded for decades evaporated before my calm authority. Patricia's eyes widened, the mascara on her perfectly applied lashes failing to hide her shock. Marcus slumped slightly in his chair, realizing the assumptions he had relied on for years were entirely incorrect. "Sir, ma'am," the guard continued, addressing both my father and me, Security will follow your instructions, Miss Castellano, but we will not act against your authority. The building, the event, all of it, you are in charge. The significance of the moment hit Dad like a physical weight. He had commanded boardrooms, orchestrated billion-dollar deals, and stood as one of the most powerful men in the city. But in this room, under these chandeliers, with all of the city's elite watching, he had no control. I had it all. I smiled faintly, the calm I had maintained all evening now radiating completely. "Thank you," I said, turning to the guard. "Please ensure everything continues smoothly. And perhaps remind my family that respect for the building and its owner comes first." Dad opened his mouth, but no words came. Marcus exchanged a look with Sophia, his confidence entirely gone, replaced with a dawning realization of where the true power lay. Patricia's hands tightened in her lap, the jewelry on her wrists gleaming under the chandelier light, but unable to mask the unease she felt. The guests, initially silent, began whispering among themselves, eyes darting between Dad, me, and the security guard. Their awe and curiosity were palpable. Everyone understood the significance. The quiet, underestimated daughter had orchestrated a power shift so complete it left her entire family publicly humbled. I set my phone on the table, opening the building's management dashboard for everyone to see. The detailed control over security, property access, tenant communications, and revenue streams displayed across the screen, a visual testament to the empire I had quietly built. Marcus's platinum cufflinks, Sophia's designer dress, Patricia's flawless gown, none of it mattered. The control, the authority, the tangible proof of accomplishment rested entirely with me. Dad finally exhaled, leaning back in his chair, the weight of realization heavy in his eyes. I don't understand," he whispered. "You will. And perhaps tonight, everyone will understand as well." The Metropolitan Tower ballroom, once a scene of celebration and polite chatter, had transformed into a room buzzing with quiet astonishment. My family sat frozen, each processing the sudden shift in power. Dad's posture was rigid, his confident aura replaced by disbelief. Patricia's composure had crumbled completely, the sparkle in her eyes replaced by uncertainty. Marcus's usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by the dawning realization that his life of privilege existed atop buildings I now owned. I remained calm, letting the room absorb the revelation fully. Every detail mattered. The subtle click of my heels on the marble floor as I moved closer to the center of the room, the measured calm in my voice, the quiet authority radiating from my presence. Since there seems to be some confusion, perhaps it's worth reviewing exactly what has been accomplished quietly over the past 8 years. Dad's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, as though trying to penetrate the calm exterior I projected. "Natalie, I still don't understand. You're suggesting you've been building an empire?" I smiled faintly, opening my phone to display the comprehensive dashboard of my holdings. Not just building, owning, controlling, managing. The Metropolitan Tower is just the tip of the iceberg. I own 12 commercial properties across the city, several of which happen to house offices, apartments, and ventures belonging to this very family. Patricia's eyes widened, her hands clutching the folds of her gown. Marcus's platinum cufflinks caught the light as he adjusted his sleeve nervously. Sophia's hand gripped his arm tightly, a silent acknowledgement that their carefully constructed world had shifted beneath them. This building, and many others, are part of Meridian Holdings' portfolio, which I have been managing since I was 18. The total value of my properties exceeds $400 million, and that doesn't even include other investments, projects, and acquisitions that have quietly grown in parallel. A hushed murmur rippled through the room. Prominent business figures leaned forward, their interest piqued not by the family drama, but by the proof of strategic intelligence and foresight displayed before them. The guests were now witnessing something rare, a private family hierarchy overturned in real time. Authority claimed not by birthright, but by action. Dad's expression shifted rapidly, from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. You didn't tell us. Why? His voice was low, almost trembling, revealing the weight of decades of assumptions crumbling in seconds. Because every time I tried, you dismissed my accomplishments as fantasies, dreams too small or unrealistic. You said real estate requires serious capital and professional connections, things I had already mastered quietly. When I mentioned expanding my portfolio, you said I was in over my head. I let my results speak for themselves. The crowd shifted, now fully attentive. Everyone understood that the story they had been witnessing was no longer just a family spat. It was a lesson in underestimated intelligence, patience, and strategy. The Metropolitan Tower itself, the centerpiece of Dad's celebration, now symbolized the ultimate revolution, that the quietest presence in the room had orchestrated the greatest demonstration of power. I gestured to my phone. Here is the live management dashboard. Security, tenants, revenue, properties. Everything under my control. Your offices, your residences, even your lifestyle choices. All facilitated through buildings I own. Dad exhaled slowly, his voice unsteady. I had no idea. Marcus leaned forward, awe replacing his previous arrogance. Natalie, His words faltered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the revelation. Yes, I said calmly, letting the silence linger just long enough for the lesson to settle. You all live and work in buildings that belong to me. And that's just the beginning of the empire I have quietly built. The room remained charged, a subtle hum of astonishment and respect flowing through every guest. Conversations began again, but now with a different energy. Where once there had been admiration for Dad's success, now there was acknowledgement of my authority, foresight, and tenacity. Even Patricia's carefully maintained poise was tinged with the realization that her influence, too, had limits. Tonight, the balance had shifted. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was the one who held the ultimate authority, the one whose strategy, patience, and vision commanded respect. And everyone in that room, family included, had witnessed the quiet, undeniable demonstration of power.
The energy in the Metropolitan Tower ballroom had shifted completely. Where earlier there had been polite conversation and polite laughter, now there was a charged quiet, filled with the subtle hum of awe and disbelief. Guests who had once admired Dad's dominance now glanced at me with newfound respect. My family, still seated at the head table, was visibly grappling with the sudden reversal of authority. Dad's hands rested on the polished marble, trembling slightly as he leaned forward. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, softened with a mixture of confusion and reluctant admiration. Patricia, who had always maintained the perfect balance of poise and strategic charm, sat rigid, her gaze fixed on me, acknowledging silently that the hierarchy she had relied on was no longer intact. Marcus, who had once dominated conversations with his early successes, now looked small in the glow of what I had quietly built. Sophia's hand still gripped his arm, her expression a mix of shock and realization. I took a measured breath, aware that the room was holding its collective attention. Tonight, I began, my voice calm but carrying authority, is not just a celebration. It's a moment to recognize the value of patience, strategy, and vision. What you see is the result of years of careful planning, disciplined investment, and the quiet understanding that results speak louder than words. A few guests murmured in agreement, nodding subtly, as if confirming that what they were witnessing was not just family drama, but a masterclass in quiet, calculated success. Dad's jaw tightened, but there was no anger, only the dawning awareness that the lesson had been delivered, and it was irrefutable. Father, I continued, my gaze steady, I hope this clarifies why I've chosen my path and why I've always insisted on independence. This isn't about rebellion or defiance. It's about creating something lasting, something tangible, something that commands respect without demanding it. Dad exhaled, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. Natalie, I see now. I can't believe I underestimated you. I thought I was teaching you lessons, guiding you, but you've surpassed me. His voice carried a mixture of awe and humility, a side I had rarely seen. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line, her carefully constructed world now needing recalibration. Marcus, still stunned, finally exhaled and spoke, his voice quieter, more respectful. Natalie, I've been arrogant. I assumed my path was predestined, that success was inherited. But seeing what you've built, I realize there's so much I can learn from you. Sophia gave him a reassuring nod, clearly ready to support this shift in dynamic. I smiled faintly, letting the moment settle. Learning is a lifelong journey, Marcus, and tonight I hope we can all recognize that leadership and success come in many forms. Some of us lead with visibility and tradition, others with strategy and subtlety. Both paths can achieve extraordinary results. The guests, previously murmuring in astonishment, now began to approach, some with congratulations, others with genuine curiosity about potential collaborations and investment opportunities. Mrs. Wellington from the City Planning Commission shook my hand with admiration. Ms. Castellano, your developments have transformed neighborhoods. I had no idea you were behind this. Dr. Morrison from the Medical Center Board followed suit. Your impact is remarkable. We should discuss expanding our partnership. Dad leaned closer to me as the conversations continued, his voice now quiet but sincere. Natalie, I owe you more than an apology. I misjudged you for years. You've taught me something invaluable tonight. I nodded, placing a gentle hand on his. It's never too late to start over, Father. Respect, understanding, and collaboration can always be rebuilt. Tonight, we start as equals. The room, once tense with drama, now held a different energy, one of respect, admiration, and acknowledgement. Guests were no longer just observers of family conflict. They were witnessing a profound realignment of authority and a lesson in the power of patience and vision. In that moment, I realized that control was not just about ownership of buildings or wealth, it was about commanding respect through actions, results, and unwavering confidence. And now, finally, my family and the city's elite understood that entirely. The ballroom had transformed completely. What began as Dad's grand celebration had shifted into a recognition of a new kind of power. The quiet, deliberate authority of someone who had built an empire under the radar. The city's elite, once captivated by Dad's presence, now quietly acknowledged my influence, whispering to one another, exchanging cards, and asking subtle questions about investment strategies. I stood near the center of the room, my posture composed, every movement deliberate. Dad, Patricia, Marcus, and Sophia sat at the head table, their expressions a mix of astonishment, respect, and a dawning understanding of the new hierarchy. The guests, many of whom had come to celebrate Dad, now found themselves in the presence of someone who had quietly amassed power far beyond their expectations. Tonight, I said, my voice calm but carrying authority, is not just about birthdays or family celebrations. It's about understanding that leadership, vision, and perseverance often manifest in unexpected ways. My path has been quiet, yes, but deliberate, and it has led to tangible results that I hope we can all appreciate. Dad's eyes softened as he leaned back in his chair. Natalie, I've spent decades thinking I understood what success meant. I see now that I was wrong. You've accomplished more than I imagined, and you've done it on your own terms." Patricia's expression, though still controlled, had shifted. The faint tension in her shoulders indicated acknowledgement, if not full acceptance, that her influence was no longer absolute. Marcus, humbled by the events of the evening, nodded slowly. Sophia reached over and gently squeezed his hand, a silent affirmation that their family dynamic had irrevocably changed. I gestured toward the guests. It's also important to remember that success is not solely about wealth or ownership. It's about creating value, building something lasting, and inspiring others to follow your lead. Tonight we celebrate not just family, but the potential we each have to make an impact beyond ourselves. Conversations began anew, this time with a palpable energy of curiosity, collaboration, and genuine admiration. Guests approached with thoughtful questions about investments, strategies, and partnerships. Mrs. Wellington from the City Planning Commission shook my hand, her tone filled with genuine respect. "Miss Castellano, your work has transformed the city. We would love to explore expanding our projects with you." Dr. Morrison from the Medical Center Board followed suit. "Your developments have reshaped our community. The healthcare facilities you've invested in are remarkable. We need to discuss further opportunities." Dad leaned closer, his voice low but sincere. "Natalie, more than an apology, I want to learn from you. I've underestimated your vision and your patience. Tonight, you've taught me what it truly means to lead." I smiled gently, placing my hand over his. "It's never too late to start anew, Father. Respect, understanding, and collaboration can always be rebuilt. We move forward together, as equals." Marcus, humbled and thoughtful, looked at me with newfound admiration. "I want to learn from you as well. I've realized that legacy isn't just inherited, it's created. I want to work alongside you." I handed him one of my business cards. "Of course, Marcus, but remember, in my world, everyone starts at the beginning, regardless of their last name." His nod was sincere, a promise to embrace the journey without entitlement. As the evening wound down, guests began to leave, several stopping to thank me for hosting such a memorable night. Business cards exchanged hands, opportunities discussed, and the air in the ballroom transformed from one of drama to one of inspiration and possibility. The final moment came when Dad raised his glass for a toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice steady, carrying both pride and humility. "Earlier tonight, I misjudged my daughter. I spoke without understanding. I said Natalie disappointed me, but I was wrong. She has amazed me. She has built an empire quietly, with patience, vision, and determination. To Natalie Castellano, the daughter who taught her father that sometimes the student becomes the teacher." The applause that followed was genuine, enthusiastic, and heartfelt. I stood, acknowledging it with a simple nod and smile, realizing that the journey wasn't just about proving success, it was about redefining respect, love, and family. Later, as the last guests departed, Dad approached me once more. "Natalie, you've set the bar incredibly high. I'm proud of you." I hugged him, feeling the weight of years of misunderstanding lift. "And now, Father, we start again. Together." The Metropolitan Tower, the very symbol of my quiet triumph, stood tall outside the ballroom windows, gleaming in the city lights, a reminder that perseverance, vision, and subtle power can transform not only one's life, but the dynamics of an entire family.